You think you make choices. You think when you decide to raise your hand, to speak, to turn left instead of right, that decision comes from you, from your will, your conscious control. You believe you're the author of your actions, that you could have done otherwise, that your choices are free. But what if that's an illusion? What if every decision you think you're making was determined billions of years ago by the initial conditions of the universe and the laws of physics? What if your sense of choosing is just your brain narrating a story about processes that were already set in motion? What if free will is a lie your brain tells you? I'm Leonard Susskind, and I've spent 50 years thinking about the laws of physics. And those laws suggest something disturbing. They suggest that in a deterministic universe governed by precise mathematical rules, there's no room for free will. Your future is encoded in your past. Every thought, every choice, every action follows inevitably from what came before. You are not free. You are a machine running a program written by physics. Let me start with classical mechanics, Newton's laws. These laws are completely deterministic. If you know the position and momentum of every particle in the universe at one moment, you can calculate their positions and momenta at any future moment. The equations of motion are differential equations. Given initial conditions and the forces, you integrate forward in time and get unique solutions. The future is mathematically determined by the past. No ambiguity, no randomness, no choice. This was clearly understood by the 18th century. Pierre-Simon Laplace formulated what's now called Laplace's demon. Imagine an intelligence that knows the precise location and momentum of every atom in the universe. This demon could use Newton's laws to calculate the entire future and past of the universe with perfect accuracy. Everything that will happen is already determined by what is. Every human action, every thought, every decision is just particles moving according to deterministic laws. Laplace wrote, "We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future. An intellect which at a certain moment would know all forces that set nature in motion and all positions of all items of which nature is composed, if this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. This is determinism. The universe is a clockwork mechanism. Every event is the inevitable consequence of prior events. And if that's true, then when you think you're making a free choice, you're not. You're just a collection of particles obeying Newton's laws. The feeling of choice is an illusion generated by your brain, which itself is just particles obeying laws. Now, you might object. You might say, but we know classical mechanics isn't the final word. Quantum mechanics is fundamental, and quantum mechanics is probabilistic, not deterministic. There's genuine randomness. When you measure a quantum system, you get a random outcome. The wave function gives probabilities but not certainties. Doesn't this randomness save free will? No. It makes things worse. Randomness is not the same as freedom. If your decisions are random, they're not controlled by you, they're just noise. Free will requires that you could have chosen differently and that the choice reflects your desires, your reasoning, your values. Random quantum fluctuations in your brain don't give you control. They take it away. If your decisions are determined by deterministic laws, you're a machine. If they're determined by random quantum events, you're a dice roll. Neither gives you freedom. Let me explain how quantum mechanics actually works. The wave function evolves deterministically according to the Schrödinger equation. This evolution is completely predictable. Given the wave function at one time, you can calculate it at any future time. The randomness only appears during measurement. When you measure a quantum system in a superposition, You get one of several possible outcomes with probabilities given by the wave function, but you can't predict which outcome you'll get. It's genuinely random. Now, here's the problem. If your brain is a quantum system and your decisions depend on quantum measurements happening in neurons, then your decisions are partly random, not controlled by you, not reflecting your will, just random outcomes of quantum processes. Some people have argued that quantum randomness in the brain could be the source of free will. That consciousness somehow collapses wave functions in ways that aren't random but reflect genuine choice. But there's no evidence for this, and no theoretical framework that makes it work. Quantum mechanics gives you randomness, not freedom. Moreover, most neuroscientists think the brain operates classically at the level relevant to decision-making. Neurons are large, warm, wet systems where quantum effects decohere essentially instantly. The timescales for quantum coherence in biological systems are nanoseconds or less. The timescales for neural processing are milliseconds to seconds. By the time your brain is making a decision, any quantum superpositions have long since collapsed into classical states. Your brain is a classical computer, deterministic, not quantum, not random, just following physical laws. Now, let me tell you about experiments that make this even more disturbing. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet performed a series of experiments on voluntary action. He asked subjects to flex their wrist whenever they felt the urge. He measured the exact time they reported becoming aware of the decision to move. And he measured brain activity using EEG. What he found was shocking. The brain showed a buildup of activity called the readiness potential about 500 milliseconds before the subject reported being aware of deciding to move. And the movement itself happened about 200 milliseconds after the conscious awareness. The brain was preparing to move before the subject was aware of deciding to move. The decision was unconscious. The conscious experience of deciding came later, after the brain had already committed to the action. This suggests that consciousness doesn't cause actions. It observes them after the fact and creates a narrative about having chosen them. You don't decide to move and then move. Your brain initiates movement and then tells you that you decided to move. The feeling of free will is a post hoc rationalization. Libet's experiments have been replicated and extended. More recent studies using fMRI show that brain activity predicting a decision can be detected up to 10 seconds before the subject is aware of making the decision. 10 seconds. Your brain knows what you're going to decide before you know. The decision is made unconsciously by neural processes, and only later does consciousness become aware of it and claim credit. This is deeply troubling. It suggests that consciousness is not in control, that the feeling of making a choice is an illusion, that by the time you're aware of a decision, it's already been made by unconscious processes. You are not the author of your actions. You are the narrator of a story about actions your brain has already taken. Now, some people argue that these experiments only apply to simple motor decisions, flexing a wrist, pressing a button, not to complex decisions involving reasoning and deliberation. But there's no reason to think complex decisions are fundamentally different. They involve more neural processing, more time, more factors. But there's still physical processes in your brain, still deterministic or random, still not free. Let me give you another perspective. Compatibilism. Some philosophers argue that free will is compatible with determinism. They define free will differently, not as the ability to have done otherwise given identical past conditions, but as the ability to act according to your desires without external coercion. In this view, you have free will if your actions reflect your motivations, your reasoning, your character, even if those motivations were themselves determined by prior causes. You're free if you're doing what you want, even if what you want was determined by your genes, your upbringing, your experiences. This is a weaker notion of free will. It's the freedom to act on your desires, not the freedom to have chosen different desires. And it's compatible with determinism because it doesn't require that you could have done otherwise. It only requires that your actions flow from your mental states. But I'm not sure this rescues free will in any meaningful sense. If your desires, your reasoning, your character were all determined by factors outside your control, your genes, your environment, the initial conditions of the universe, then in what sense are your actions really yours? You didn't choose your genes, you didn't choose your childhood, you didn't choose the neural architecture your brain developed. All of these were determined by physics and chance. And these factors determine your desires and decisions. So even if you're acting on your desires, those desires are not freely chosen. They're the output of a deterministic or random process. Compatibilism tries to define free will in a way that's compatible with determinism. But it doesn't give you the kind of free will most people think they have. The kind where you're the ultimate source of your actions, where you could have genuinely done otherwise. Now let me talk about legal and moral implications. If free will is an illusion, what does that mean for responsibility? Can we punish people for crimes if they couldn't have done otherwise? Can we praise people for good actions if those actions were determined? This is not just philosophy. This has real consequences. Our legal system is based on the idea that people are responsible for their actions, that they chose to commit crimes, that they deserve punishment. But if determinism is true, criminals didn't choose to commit crimes, any more than a falling rock chooses to fall. Their actions were the inevitable result of their brain states, which were the result of their genes, and environment, which were the result of physics. Some people argue that even in a deterministic universe, we should still have punishment. Not because people deserve it, but because punishment is a deterrent. It changes future behavior. It's a practical tool for shaping society. But this seems cold. It treats people as machines to be programmed through reinforcement, not as moral agents deserving of respect. Others argue that understanding determinism should make us more compassionate. If people's actions are determined by factors outside their control, then we should focus on rehabilitation rather than retribution, on fixing the conditions that lead to crime rather than blaming individuals, on treating people as products of their circumstances rather than as inherently good or evil. This is a more humane approach, but it's still troubling because it removes agency. It treats people as broken machines to be repaired rather than as autonomous beings making choices. Now let me address quantum mechanics again because some people think it offers an escape. They point to interpretations of quantum mechanics like the many worlds interpretation. In many worlds, every quantum measurement splits the universe into branches. In one branch, you measure spin up, in another you measure spin down. Both happen. There's no randomness because all outcomes occur. The wave function never collapses, it just evolves deterministically. Some people argue this gives you free will, that when you make a decision, the universe splits, and in different branches you make different choices. So all possible choices are realized. You have free will in the sense that all versions of you explore all possibilities, but this doesn't solve the problem. In each branch, your choice was determined by the state of your brain in that branch. You in this branch didn't choose which branch you're in. You didn't choose to be the version of you that chose A rather than B. The branching happened deterministically, according to the Schrödinger equation. You have no control over it. Many worlds doesn't give you freedom. It just says there are many deterministic versions of you, each determined, none free. And in other interpretations, like Copenhagen or objective collapse theories, the randomness is genuinely random, not controlled by you, not freedom, just dice rolls at the quantum level. So quantum mechanics doesn't say free will. It either gives you determinism with many branches or determinism with random noise. Neither is freedom. Now, let me tell you why I think the free will debate matters beyond philosophy. It affects how we see ourselves. If we're deterministic machines, then the narrative we tell ourselves about being agents, making choices, shaping our lives is false. We're passengers in bodies running programs written by physics. This is a deeply disempowering realization. It removes meaning. If your achievements weren't really your choices, why take pride in them? If your failures weren't really your fault, why feel shame? If nothing you do is genuinely chosen, why does anything matter? Some people embrace this. They find peace in determinism. They let go of anxiety about choices because there are no real choices. They accept that they're part of a causal chain and they stop worrying about control. But others find it horrifying. They can't shake the feeling of agency, even if intellectually they accept determinism. The feeling of choosing is so vivid, so immediate, that it's hard to believe it's an illusion. And this creates cognitive dissonance. Your experience says you're free, physics says you're not. How do you live with that? I don't have a satisfying answer. Personally, I live as if I have free will, even though intellectually I'm not sure I do. I make plans, I deliberate, I feel responsible. But I also recognize that these feelings might be illusions, that I might be a deterministic system narrating a story about freedom that doesn't exist. It's uncomfortable, but it's what physics suggests. Let me end with this. The laws of physics are deterministic or random. Neither leaves room for free will in the libertarian sense, the sense where you're the ultimate uncaused cause of your actions, where you could have genuinely done otherwise. That kind of free will seems incompatible with physics. Now, maybe there's something we're missing. Maybe consciousness has properties that escape physical law. Maybe there's some non-physical aspect of mind that can influence the brain without violating conservation laws. But there's no evidence for this. And it's not parsimonious. It requires adding something to our ontology that we have no reason to believe exists. The simpler explanation is that free will is an illusion, a useful fiction that evolution gave us because organisms that believe they're making choices behave more adaptively than organisms that don't. The illusion of agency motivates action. It makes you try. It makes you learn. It makes you plan. Even if it's false, it's adaptive. So maybe free will is a lie, but it's a lie that helps us survive, a lie that makes life worth living. Because even if your choices are determined, the process of deliberation, of weighing options, of acting on your values, that process is real. It's part of the causal chain. Your thoughts matter not because they're free, but because they're part of the mechanism that determines what happens next. You are a link in the causal chain of the universe. Not free, but not meaningless either. Your actions have consequences. Your thoughts shape the future. Not freely, but genuinely. That's what physics tells me. After 50 years of thinking about determinism and quantum mechanics and causation, free will might be a lie, but we are not. We exist, we think, we act, we matter, even if we're not free. Thank you for watching. Now you know why I'm not sure you chose to watch this. Welcome to determinism.